This story is designed for English listening practice to improve your ability to track subtle emotional cues and narrative tension. The focus is on identifying gaslighting techniques, and the lesson is that true safety never requires the surrender of your autonomy. Let's begin. The silence in the hallway was heavy and expensive. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite and adjusted the silk straps of my gown. The fabric was a deep midnight blue, and it had cost more than my first car. I smoothed the material over my hips and tried to steady my breathing. My hands were trembling. They shook with a fine and rhythmic tremor that I could not suppress. I clasped them together to hide the motion. The house was quiet around me. It was a sprawling estate with marble floors and high ceilings and security cameras in every corner. It was the kind of home that people stopped to photograph from the street. It was perfect. My husband Adrian was perfect. We were the envy of the entire town. Tonight was the annual charity gala, and we were the guests of honor. I should have felt proud. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I looked at my reflection and saw a woman who looked polished and poised, but her eyes were wide with a secret fear. Adrian entered the room without a sound. He moved with the grace of a man who owned the world. He was handsome in his tuxedo. He smiled at me in the mirror, and the expression was warm and admiring. He walked up behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm. He told me that I looked breathtaking. He said that everyone would be looking at me tonight. I forced myself to smile back at his reflection. I tried to lean into his touch, but my body remained stiff. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He opened it to reveal a diamond necklace that caught the light. He fastened it around my neck. The metal felt cold against my skin. He whispered that I deserved the best. He kissed my cheek. I felt a wave of nausea. He asked if I was ready to go. I nodded. I told him I just needed to grab my phone. I turned to the bedside table where I had left it charging. The surface was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the drawer. It was empty. I checked under the pillow. Nothing. I felt a spike of panic. I turned back to Adrian. I asked him if he had seen my phone. He smiled again. He reached into his own jacket pocket and pulled out my device. He said he had taken it downstairs to update the software for me. He said it was running slow, and he wanted everything to be perfect for me. He handed it back. The screen was warm. I unlocked it. The call log was empty. The recent messages were gone. I looked up at him. He was watching me closely. He asked if something was wrong. I shook my head. I lied and said everything was fine. He told me to wait there while he brought the car around. He left the room and closed the door. I heard the lock click. I stared at the door. He never locked the bedroom door from the outside. I walked over to it and turned the handle. It did not budge. I tried again. It was locked. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was a mistake. I told myself the latch was sticky. I knocked on the wood. I called out his name. Silence answered me. I stepped back. I looked at the window. It overlooked the back garden. The drop was too high. I saw the security camera mounted on the garden wall. It slowly swiveled. It pointed directly at the bedroom window. The red light blinked. I felt like a specimen in a jar. I went back to the door and rattled the handle. I felt the panic rising in my chest like dark water. I was trapped in a luxury suite, wearing a fortune in diamonds, and I could not leave. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. I paced the room. I checked my phone again. No signal. The Wi-Fi icon was gone. I was cut off. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to stop shaking. I heard footsteps in the hall. The lock clicked again. The door opened. Adrian stood there. He looked concerned. He asked why I had locked the door. He said he had been waiting for me in the car. He said I was acting strange. He reached out and touched my forehead. He asked if I was feverish. I stared at him. I knew I had not locked the door. I knew he had the key, but his face was a mask of pure concern. He offered his arm. He said, "We did not want to be late." I stood up. My legs felt weak. I took his arm. He led me out of the room and down the grand staircase. He opened the front door for me. The evening air hit my face, but it did not feel like freedom. He guided me into the car and closed the door. The lock engaged with a heavy thud. He sat in the driver's seat and smiled at me. He treats me like a queen, and I feel like a prisoner. It began with the illusion of rescue. I met Adrian 3 years ago during the most chaotic week of my life. My landlord had just sold my building, my car had broken down on the highway, and I was drowning in student debt while working 2 jobs that barely covered the interest. I was exhausted. I was fraying at the edges. I was standing in the rain waiting for a bus that was 40 minutes late when a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Adrian looked out. He was not a stranger. He was a regular customer at the gallery where I worked weekends. He asked if I needed a ride. I hesitated. I was raised to be independent. I was raised to solve my own problems. But the rain was cold and my shoes were leaking. I got in. The car was warm. It smelled of leather and expensive cologne. He did not ask for directions. He already knew where I lived. He drove me to my door and waited until I was safely inside. It felt like safety. It felt like I could finally exhale. The courtship was not a romance. It was a campaign of overwhelming competence. Adrian did not just date me, he solved me. On our second date, he took me to a restaurant where there were no prices on the menu. He ordered for me without asking what I liked. He chose a white wine and a delicate fish dish. I wanted the steak, but I ate the fish. It was delicious. He smiled as I ate and told me he knew exactly what I needed. He said I looked tired. He said I looked like someone who had been carrying the world for too long. He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm and dry. He told me to let go. He told me he would take care of everything. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I was so tired of fighting for every inch of ground. I wanted to surrender. I wanted to believe him. 2 weeks later, my car situation escalated. The mechanic called with a quote that was more than my monthly rent. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried. Adrian showed up an hour later with a key in his hand. He led me outside to a brand new SUV parked in my spot. He said it was a lease. He said he had put it in his name to save me the hassle of credit checks. He said I could pay him back whenever I could. I tried to refuse. I told him it was too much. He looked hurt. He asked if I trusted him. He said he could not bear the thought of me driving that death trap. He said my safety was worth more than money. I took the key. I felt a heavy stone of guilt settle in my stomach, but I also felt relief. I drove the car to work the next day. My coworkers stared. They whispered. They told me I was the luckiest woman alive. I tried to agree with them. The control tightened so slowly, I mistook it for intimacy. He started staying over at my apartment more often. He complained about the noise from the neighbors. He complained about the drafty windows. One evening, he came home with a stack of boxes. He said he was moving me. He did not ask, he announced. He had found a condo in a better neighborhood. He had already paid the deposit and the first 6 months of rent. He said my current place was dangerous. He said he had seen people loitering in the alley. He said he would not sleep at night knowing I was there. I argued. I told him I could not afford the new place. He silenced me with a kiss. He said we were a team now. He said money was just a tool. He packed my books while I stood there, paralyzed by his generosity. We moved the next day. I lost my security deposit at the old place because of the short notice. Adrian just laughed and wrote a check to cover it. I was losing my financial footing, step by step. Then came the isolation disguised as protection. I had a best friend named Sarah. We had known each other since college. She was loud and messy and fiercely loyal. Adrian did not like her. He never said it outright. Instead, he would sigh whenever her name came up on my phone. He would ask questions that planted seeds of doubt. He asked why Sarah only called when she needed something. He asked if I noticed that Sarah never asked about my day. He pointed out that Sarah was jealous of my new life. I defended her at first, but Adrian was persistent. He would plan surprise romantic getaways on the weekends I was supposed to see her. He would buy tickets to the opera on her birthday. He made it impossible to maintain the connection without disappointing him. Slowly, I stopped answering her calls. I stopped making plans. Adrian told me I was evolving. He said some people were meant to be left behind. I felt a deep ache of loss, but I pushed it down. I told myself he was right. I told myself he wanted the best for me. The biggest shift happened when he suggested I quit my day job. I was working as an administrative assistant at a law firm. It was boring, but it was steady. It was my own money. Adrian sat me down one evening with a spreadsheet. He had analyzed my finances. He showed me that after taxes and commuting costs, I was barely breaking even. He said it was a waste of my potential. He said I should focus on my painting. He said he would cover the household expenses so I could be an artist. It sounded like a dream. It was exactly what I had always wanted. I resigned the next week. The first month was euphoric. I painted every day. I cooked elaborate meals. But then, the reality set in. I had no income. I had to ask him for money for coffee. I had to ask him for money for tampons. He never said no, but he always asked for a receipt. He called it managing the household budget. He set up a joint account, but he kept the main login. I had a card, but I got a text alert every time I used it, and so did he. He began to curate my appearance. He would bring home dresses and ask me to wear them. They were always elegant, always expensive, and never quite my style. If I wore something from my old wardrobe, he would frown. He would ask if I really wanted to wear that to dinner. He would suggest that it looked cheap. He would say it did not reflect the woman I was becoming. I started donating my old clothes. I started dressing to please him. I started looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger. A beautiful stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. He hired a stylist to come to the house. She threw out my favorite jeans. She threw out my worn-out sweaters. Adrian paid her and thanked her for polishing me. I stood in my closet and felt a cold wind blow through the empty spaces. We got married in a ceremony that he planned. He chose the flowers. He chose the venue. He chose the guest list. My family was there, but they felt like spectators. Adrian charmed them all. My mother told me he was a prince. My father told me I had done well. I stood at the altar and promised to love and honor him. I felt like an imposter. I felt like I was playing a role in a movie that someone else was directing. During the reception, I went to the bathroom to breathe. I looked at my ring. It was enormous. It was heavy. It dragged my hand down. I heard two of his business partners talking in the hallway. They were saying how well Adrian had trained me. They laughed. I stayed in the stall until they left. When I came out, Adrian was waiting. He asked where I had been. He said people were waiting to toast us. He took my hand and led me back to the spotlight. His grip was just a little too tight. Moving into the mansion was the final gate closing. The house was on a hill, separated from the rest of the town by a high iron gate. It was beautiful and cold. It was full of hard surfaces and echoes. Adrian gave me a tour. He showed me the security system. It was state-of-the-art. There were cameras at every entrance. There were motion sensors in the hallways. He gave me a code for the alarm. He said it was to keep the bad world out. He said I was his treasure and he had to protect me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized that the cameras faced inward as well as outward. I realized that the control panel logged every time a door was opened. I was safe. Yes. But I was also monitored. The days fell into a rigid pattern. Adrian woke up at 6. I was expected to be up at 6:30. We had breakfast together in the solarium. He would read the news, and I would sit quietly. If I tried to read a book, he would interrupt me. He would ask about the dinner menu. He would ask about the gardener's schedule. He had fired the cleaning lady I liked because she talked too much. He replaced her with a service that sent different people every week. I never learned their names. I was alone in the house all day. I painted, but the inspiration was drying up. My paintings became dark and repetitive. Adrian hung them in the guest hallway. He told his friends I was dabbling. He diminished my work with a smile. He took over the mail. He said he wanted to save me the trouble of sorting through junk. He had all the bills sent to his office. I stopped seeing bank statements. I stopped seeing utility bills. I lost track of what things cost. One day, I received a letter from an old friend from college. It had been opened and resealed with tape. I asked Adrian about it. He said it must have been an accident. He said the letter opener slipped, but the cut was clean and precise. I read the letter. It was a wedding invitation. The date had already passed. I looked at the postmark. It had arrived 3 weeks ago. I confronted him. He looked confused. He said he thought he had given it to me. He said I must have forgotten. He looked so sincere. I started to doubt my own memory. Had he given it to me? Was I losing my mind? I apologized. He hugged me and told me I was just stressed. The guilt was a constant companion. I lived in luxury while my friends struggled. I had no right to complain. That was what the voice in my head said. That was what Adrian implied. Whenever I expressed a desire to go out, to work, to do something on my own, he would look wounded. He would list all the things he did for me. He would mention the mortgage, the car, the vacations, the clothes. He would ask if I was unhappy. He would ask if his love was not enough. I would retreat. I would say I was grateful. I would say I was happy. I learned to lie to keep the peace. I learned to suppress my own needs to avoid the look of disappointment in his eyes. He started managing my health. He made appointments for me with doctors he knew. He sat in on the consultations. He answered questions for me. He told the doctor I was prone to anxiety. He told the doctor I had trouble sleeping. The doctor prescribed pills. Adrian kept the bottle. He dispensed them to me at night. He said he did not want me to accidentally take too much. I felt like a child. I felt like an invalid. I took the pills because it was easier than arguing. They made me foggy. They made the days blur together. I stopped painting. I spent hours staring out the window at the garden. The gardener would wave, and I would not wave back. I was too tired. One afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. Just a walk down the hill to the town. I needed fresh air. I needed to see people. I put on my coat and walked to the front gate. I punched in the code. The keypad beeped red. Access denied. I tried again. Denied. I thought I had forgotten the number. I tried the intercom. It rang in the house. No one answered. I was locked in. I panicked. I climbed the fence? No. It was too high. I walked back to the house and called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. I told him the gate was broken. He laughed. He said he had changed the code that morning for security reasons. He said there had been reports of break-ins in the area. He said he forgot to tell me. He gave me the new code. I wrote it down. My hand was shaking. It felt like a test. It felt like a reminder of who held the keys. The gaslighting became subtle and pervasive. Objects would move. I would leave my keys on the counter, and they would be in the drawer. I would leave a book on the sofa, and it would be on the shelf. I would ask Adrian. He would say I was becoming forgetful. He would say I needed to pay more attention. He bought me a planner. He insisted I write everything down. I started to believe him. I started to believe that I was incompetent. I relied on him for everything. I asked him what day it was. I asked him where we were going. I ceased to be an active participant in my own life. I became a passenger, and yet everyone saw a fairy tale. We went to parties and people fawned over us. Women told me they wanted a husband like Adrian. Men clapped him on the back. I smiled until my face hurt. I held his arm and played the part of the adoring wife. But inside, I was screaming. I was screaming for someone to see the fear in my eyes. I was screaming for someone to notice that I never spoke unless he prompted me. But no one looked that closely. They were blinded by the diamond on my neck. They were blinded by the shine of the cage. One night, I woke up and found the bed empty. I walked downstairs. The light was on in his study. The door was ajar. I heard him talking on the phone. His voice was low and cold. He was talking about assets. He was talking about leverage. He mentioned my name. He said, "She is completely manageable now. The transfer is ready." I froze. I did not know what transfer he was talking about. I stepped back into the shadows. He hung up. He turned and saw me. For a split second, his face was a mask of fury. Then, instantly, it smoothed into concern. He asked what I was doing out of bed. He walked over and guided me back upstairs. He tucked me in. He sat by the bed until I fell asleep, but the words stayed with me. Completely manageable. The feeling of being a project, not a person, grew. He would critique my conversation after parties. He would tell me I laughed too loud. He would tell me I shouldn't have mentioned politics. He said it reflected poorly on us. He said we had an image to maintain. I started to speak less. I started to filter every thought. I became a ghost in my own home. I walked softly. I closed doors quietly. I tried to take up as little space as possible. I thought if I made myself small enough, the pressure would stop. But the smaller I got, the more he expanded. He filled every room. He filled every silence. I remember looking at a bird in the garden once. It was a small sparrow. It was hopping on the grass, pecking at seeds. It looked scruffy and common. But then it spread its wings and flew over the wall. It was gone. I felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it took my breath away. I had the marble floors. I had the silk sheets. I had the husband who everyone adored. But that bird had the sky. I looked at the security camera mounted on the wall. It swiveled to follow the bird for a moment, then returned to focus on me. I realized then that the camera was not there to keep people out. It was there to keep me in. The realization was not sudden. It was a slow accumulation of weight. It was the weight of the unanswered texts. It was the weight of the lost friends. It was the weight of the pills on the nightstand. It was the weight of the we that had erased the I. I looked around the perfect living room. Everything in it was chosen by him. The art, the furniture, the rugs, even me. I was just another curated object. I was the centerpiece of his collection. And like any valuable collection, I had to be guarded. I had to be insured. I had to be kept behind glass. I started to test the boundaries. Just small things. I would buy a different brand of coffee. I would move a vase to a different table. I would delete a message from the answering machine. Before he heard it, he always noticed. He always corrected it. The vase looks better here, darling. Why did you buy this trash? I'll order the good stuff. Did anyone call today? He knew. He always knew. It was terrifying. It meant he was paying attention to every detail. It meant there was no corner of my life that was private. I felt the loneliness settle into my bones. It was a cold, hollow ache. I missed the mess of my old life. I missed the worry about rent. At least that worry was mine. At least that struggle was real. This life was a stage set. And the curtain never came down. I was always on. I was always performing gratitude. Thank you for the dress. Thank you for the car. Thank you for saving me. But I didn't feel saved. I felt captured. The final straw of the setup was the bank account. I went to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription, not the one he managed, but antibiotics for an infection. I handed the card to the pharmacist. It was declined. I tried again. Declined. I called Adrian. He didn't answer. I called the bank. They told me my name was not on the account anymore. They said the primary holder had removed me. I stood in the pharmacy, burning with shame. I had to leave the medicine on the counter. When I got home, Adrian was in the kitchen. I asked him why. He looked surprised. He said he had switched accounts for better interest rates. He said he forgot to give me the new card. He pulled a platinum card from his wallet and handed it to me. Here, he said. This one has a higher limit. Go buy yourself something nice. He didn't understand. It wasn't about the limit. It was about the power to cut me off at a whim. It was about the fact that I was 30 years old, and I had to wait for him to hand me the means to survive. I took the card. I said thank you, but inside, a small, cold flame of anger began to burn. The house began to change. Not in structure, but in atmosphere. It ceased to be a home and became a finely tuned instrument of observation. It started with the renovation of my art studio. I had complained once, in passing, that the room felt a little dark in the afternoons. I thought nothing of it. 2 days later, a crew of contractors arrived. While Adrian was at work, they did not ask for my input. They had blueprints that Adrian had signed. They removed the solid oak door that separated my studio from the main hallway. They replaced it with a sheet of clear, floor-to-ceiling glass. When Adrian came home, he beamed. He told me that now the light would flow through the entire house. He told me that he loved seeing me create. He said he wanted to be able to look up from his desk down the hall and see his beautiful wife at her easel. I stood there and felt exposed. I could no longer close the door and cry. I could no longer curse at a ruined canvas. I was on display. Every brushstroke was public. If I stopped painting to stare out the window, he would wander in 5 minutes later. He would bring me tea. He would ask if I was blocked. He would suggest that perhaps I wasn't focusing enough. The glass wall was not about light. It was about line of sight. The phone issues started the following week. I tried to call the gallery where I used to work, just to say hello to my old manager. I dialed the number. The line connected. I heard her voice. I said hello. I started to ask how the new exhibition was going. The moment I said the word work, the call dropped. Dead silence. I looked at the screen. Call failed. I waited and tried again. The same thing happened. A burst of static. Then silence. I assumed it was bad reception. Later that evening, I tried to call my mother. We spoke for 10 minutes about the weather and her garden. The connection was crystal clear. But when I lowered my voice and tried to tell her that I felt lonely, the line crackled. The static returned. The call cut off. When Adrian came home, I mentioned the spotty service. He nodded sympathetically. He said the thick stone walls of the estate were notorious for blocking signals. He offered to install a signal booster. He set it up the next day. The reception bars on my phone went up to full strength, but the pattern continued. Calls about dinner recipes went through perfectly. Calls about my feelings, or my past, or anything real, would mysteriously disconnect. I started to censor my own conversations. I learned that if I kept the topics light and meaningless, the lines stayed open. I was being trained like a dog in a lab. Then came the mail. I loved getting mail. It was a tangible connection to the outside world. I would wait for the mail truck every day around 11 in the morning. One Tuesday, I saw the truck pull up. I saw the carrier shove a stack of envelopes into our box at the gate. I walked down the long driveway to retrieve it. I opened the box. It was empty. I frowned. I looked down the road. The truck was gone. I walked back to the house, confused. I thought maybe I had imagined it. But when I walked into the kitchen, a stack of mail was sitting on the marble island. It was neatly sorted. The junk mail was in the recycling bin, the bills were in a pile for Adrian, and a single letter addressed to me from my cousin was sitting on top. It had already been opened. The flap was torn. I stared at it. Adrian walked in from the garage. He saw me looking at the letter. He didn't even blink. He said he had picked up the mail on his way out that morning, but forgot to bring it inside until now. He said he opened my letter by mistake because he was on a conference call and wasn't looking. He laughed at his own clumsiness. He asked what my cousin had to say. He asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I realized then that he had a key to the mailbox. I realized he had intercepted the mail before I even woke up. He had screened it. I wondered how many letters I had never seen. I wondered how many invitations, how many notes from friends, had gone straight into the shredder because they didn't fit the narrative he was building. The staff turnover was the next phase of the isolation. We had a housekeeper named Mrs. Higgins. She was a kind, older woman who hummed while she dusted. She was the only person in the house who looked me in the eye. One morning, she found me crying in the laundry room. She didn't ask why. She just handed me a tissue and squeezed my shoulder. It was a tiny moment of human connection. The next day, Mrs. Higgins was gone. I asked Adrian where she was. He sighed. He looked disappointed. He told me that he had caught her stealing. He said he found some of our silver spoons in her bag. He said he had to let her go immediately. He said he didn't want to upset me by telling me earlier. I was shocked. Mrs. Higgins had worked for wealthy families for 30 years. It didn't make sense. I wanted to call her. I wanted to ask her. Adrian said it was better to leave it alone. He said he had already hired someone new. The new housekeeper was a woman named Magda. She was efficient and silent. She never hummed. She never looked me in the eye. If I entered a room she was cleaning, she would stop and wait for me to leave. She reported to Adrian. I would hear them whispering in the hall. I felt like a guest in my own home, and an unwanted one at that. The most terrifying moments were the displays of his impossible knowledge. I would be sitting in the bath, thinking about how much I missed Italian food, specifically the pasta from a little place I used to go to in the city. I wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't write it down. 2 hours later, Adrian would come home with takeout bags. He would set them on the table and smile. He would say he just had a feeling I was craving carbonara from that specific restaurant. The first time it happened, I thought it was romantic. The third time, it felt like witchcraft. How could he know? I started to check the bathroom for microphones. I checked the flower arrangements. I found nothing. Then I realized the truth was simpler and darker. He had access to my search history. He had access to my cloud account. He could see every web page I lingered on, every photo I looked at. I wasn't just living with him. I was being data mined. One afternoon, I was looking at old photos of a beach trip I took with Sarah years ago. I didn't post them. I just looked at them on my laptop. That evening, Adrian mentioned that we should book a beach vacation. He suggested the exact same town. He framed it as his idea. He was rewriting my memories, overwriting my past desires with his present generosity. I decided I needed a safety net. I needed cash. Real, untraceable cash. I didn't have a debit card I could use without him seeing the transaction, but I figured I could get cash back at the grocery store. I went to the upscale market he preferred. I bought the organic vegetables and the expensive wine. At the checkout, I selected the option for $50 cash back. The terminal beeped. A message flashed on the screen. Transaction denied. Cash limit exceeded. The cashier looked at me. She said the card issuer had blocked cash withdrawals. I felt the blood drain from my face. I paid for the groceries and left. I sat in the car and shook. He had anticipated this. He had closed the loophole. I went home and started scavenging. I checked the pockets of his coats in the closet. I checked the sofa cushions. I found a $10 bill here. A handful of quarters there. It was humiliating. I was the wife of a millionaire, stealing loose change like a desperate teenager. I hid the money in a box of tampons under the bathroom sink. It was the one place I was sure he would never look. Over 2 months, I managed to save $84. It wasn't enough to leave, but it was enough to buy a bus ticket. It was a tiny, secret anchor of hope. I needed to see Sarah. I needed to see a face that knew me before I was Adrian's wife. I knew I couldn't tell him. He would find a reason to stop me. He would get sick. The car would break down. Something would happen. So I lied. I told him I had a dentist appointment. He offered to drive me. I told him I needed to run errands afterward for female things. He looked uncomfortable, as I knew he would, and agreed to let me drive myself. I drove to the town center. I parked the car 3 blocks away from the coffee shop. I left my phone in the glove compartment. I knew he tracked the phone. I didn't know if he tracked the car. I walked to the cafe. Sarah was waiting. She looked older, tired. We hugged. I wanted to spill everything. I wanted to tell her about the glass wall and the blocked cash and the silence. But when I opened my mouth, I couldn't. I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, or worse, that she would believe me and try to save me. And Adrian would destroy her. So, I drank my coffee and told her I was fine. I told her the house was great. I told her Adrian was wonderful. She looked at me with sad eyes. She asked why I was so thin. She asked why my hands were shaking. I told her I was just cutting back on caffeine. I left after 20 minutes. I couldn't bear the lie anymore. When I got back to the car, my heart was pounding. I drove home. Adrian was waiting in the driveway. He wasn't angry. He looked devastated. He held his phone in his hand. He told me he had been so worried. He said the car's GPS showed I had parked in a residential area for 40 minutes. He asked if I was lost. He asked if I had been in an accident. He said he almost called the police. I froze. The car had a tracker too. Of course it did. I stammered. I said I had felt dizzy and pulled over to rest. He walked over and hugged me. He held me so tight I couldn't breathe. He said he couldn't handle the stress of not knowing where I was. He said he had a gift for me. He pulled a small box from his pocket. It was a smartwatch. The latest model. He put it on my wrist. He synced it to his phone, right there in the driveway. He said it was for my safety. He said it had a fall detector. He said now he would always know if I was okay. He showed me the app on his phone. It showed my heart rate. It showed my location. It showed my stress level. He had digitized my body. I looked at the watch. It felt like a shackle. I thanked him. I told him it was thoughtful. I went inside and vomited in the downstairs bathroom. The punishments for my small rebellions were never direct. He never said, "You lied, so I am punishing you." Instead, the world would just tilt against me. After the coffee shop incident, I noticed my car keys were missing. I always hung them on the hook by the door. They were gone. I searched the house. I turned out my purse. Adrian watched me search. He asked what I was looking for. I told him. He frowned. He said, "Nora, honey, you left them in the refrigerator, remember?" I stared at him. I had never put keys in the refrigerator in my life. He walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled my keys from behind the milk carton. He held them up with a pitying smile. He said he was worried about my memory. He said the stress was getting to me. He said maybe I shouldn't drive for a while until I was feeling more stable. He took the keys and put them in his pocket. He said he would drive me wherever I needed to go. It was a coup. He had seized my transportation without raising his voice. He had framed it as care, and because the keys were actually in the fridge, a small, treacherous part of me wondered if he was right. Had I done it? Was I losing my mind? The stability narrative began to expand. He started asking me if I had taken my pills. He would ask it in front of people. We would be at a dinner party, and he would lean in and whisper, loudly enough for the table to hear, "Did you remember your anxiety medication today, darling? You seem a little flushed." The guests would look at me with sympathy. They would see a fragile woman being cared for by a saint. I would blush. I would try to deny it. But the more I denied it, the more unstable I looked. He would pat my hand and say, "It's okay, I have an extra dose in the car." He was painting a picture of me as a woman on the edge. He was building a witness list for a breakdown that hadn't happened yet. I tried to find work online. I thought if I could get a freelance gig, I could build a secret account. I waited until he was asleep. I went to the study and opened his laptop. I navigated to a job board. The page loaded. Then the Wi-Fi cut out. I waited. I refreshed. Nothing. I tried a different site. Nothing. I opened a news site. It loaded perfectly. I went back to the job site. Connection error. I realized he had put parental control blocks on the router. He had blocked employment sites. He had blocked legal advice sites. He had blocked housing rentals. I was a child in a digital nursery. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. I felt the walls of the house breathing around me. They were inhaling my oxygen. The next day, I found the receipt. I was looking for a pen in Adrian's home office. I knocked a pile of papers off his desk. As I was gathering them up, I saw a crumpled receipt from a pawn shop in the city. It was dated the day before Mrs. Higgins was fired. The item listed was antique silver spoons. The seller's name was Adrian. I stared at the paper. The room spun. Mrs. Higgins hadn't stolen the spoons. Adrian had taken them. He had pawned them himself to frame her. He had destroyed an innocent woman's reputation just to remove a friendly witness from my life. He had planned it. He had executed it. And he had come home and comforted me while I cried about it. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just control, it was malice. He didn't just want to own me. He wanted to isolate me so completely that I would have no reflection other than the one he provided. I folded the receipt and put it in my bra. It was the first piece of hard evidence I had. It burned against my skin. I started to test the physical boundaries of the estate. I started taking long walks in the garden, pushing further and further toward the perimeter wall. I found a spot behind the potting shed where the ivy was thick. I pushed the vines aside and found the stone wall. It was 10 feet high. But there was a tree, an old oak, whose branches stretched near the top. I looked at the camera on the shed. It was pointed at the door, not the tree. There was a blind spot, a tiny, precious blind spot. I didn't climb it. Not yet. I just stood there and touched the bark. I needed to know there was a way out that didn't require a keypad. I stood there for 10 minutes, breathing the air that felt slightly less filtered. When I walked back to the house, Adrian was watching from the terrace. He waved. I waved back. I wondered if he could see the dirt on my hands. I went inside and washed them for 5 minutes. The love bombing returned with a vengeance. He sensed my withdrawal. He covered the house in flowers. He bought me a new wardrobe of silk loungewear. He booked a private chef to come and cook my favorite meals. He was suffocating me with luxury. He would sit next to me on the sofa and stroke my hair for hours. He would tell me how happy we were. He would tell me how dark the world was outside. He would tell me stories about women who left their husbands and ended up destitute, or attacked, or alone. He was planting fear. He was watering it with champagne. He wanted me to believe that the cage was the only place I could survive. He wanted me to be grateful for the bars. One evening, he came home with a puppy, a golden retriever puppy, with big brown eyes. I gasped. I had always wanted a dog. He put the puppy in my arms. He said, "I thought you needed a companion." I buried my face in the puppy's fur. I felt a surge of love. But then he handed me the leash. "You have to train him, Nora. If he misbehaves, if he chews the furniture, or digs in the garden, we'll have to send him away. I won't have chaos in this house." I looked at the puppy. I realized this wasn't a gift. It was a hostage. If I displeased Adrian, the dog would suffer. If I tried to leave, I would have to leave the dog behind. He had given me something to love so he could threaten to take it away. I named the dog Scout. I whispered to him that night that I was sorry. I promised him I would be perfect so he could stay. I realized I was bargaining for the dog's safety, the same way I bargained for my own. The turning point of this phase came when I tried to reclaim a small piece of my identity. I set up a canvas in the glass-walled studio. I didn't paint the flowers he liked. I didn't paint the landscapes he praised. I painted a self-portrait, but in the painting, I had no mouth. And the background was a kaleidoscope of security cameras. I poured my fear onto the canvas. It was dark and disturbing and true. I worked on it for 3 days while he was at the office. I covered it with a sheet when I heard his car. But one day, he came home early. He walked into the studio before I could hide it. He stood in front of the easel. He pulled the sheet down. I stopped breathing. He looked at the painting for a long time. The silence stretched until it screamed. Then he turned to me. He didn't yell. He looked concerned. He reached out and felt my forehead. "Nora," he said softly, "this is very disturbed. Is this how you feel?" I didn't answer. He sighed. He took a palette knife from the table. "I can't let you keep this. It's not healthy. It's a symptom of your illness." He slashed the canvas. He cut it into ribbons. He did it calmly, methodically. He destroyed my voice. Then he dropped the knife. "I'll call the doctor," he said. "We need to adjust your dosage." He walked out. I stood there and watched the ribbons of canvas sway in the draft from the air conditioner. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard resolve hardening in my chest. He thought he was breaking me, but he was just sharpening me. I retrieved the slashed canvas from the trash that night. I hid the strips under the floorboard in the closet, next to my cash stash. I added it to my collection. The receipt, the cash, the ruined art. I was building a museum of evidence. I started to write things down. Not in a journal, he would find that. I wrote on the back of the wallpaper inside the closet, in tiny letters near the floor, dates, times, incidents, Nov 4. Keys in fridge, I didn't put them there. Nov 12. Call dropped when I said lawyer. Nov 20. He slashed the painting. I was creating a record. I was anchoring myself to reality. I knew now that I was in a war. And the first rule of war is to know your enemy. I looked at Adrian across the dinner table. He was smiling. He was telling me about a charity auction. He looked like the perfect husband, but I saw the monster beneath the skin. And I smiled back. It was the first time I had smiled with my eyes open. The diagnosis was not medical. It was architectural. Adrian was constructing a reality where I was insane. And he was the suffering saint. He began to weaponize my own memory against me. It started with small appointments. I would be eating breakfast. And he would look at his watch and say, "You better hurry. You don't want to be late for the dentist." I would stare at him. I had no appointment. He would pull up his phone and show me a calendar entry. "See? Tuesday at 10. We talked about this last week. You said your tooth was hurting." I knew my tooth wasn't hurting. I knew we hadn't talked, but the entry was there, digital and accusing. I would rush to get ready, feeling flustered and confused. I would arrive at the dentist, and the receptionist would nod. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood. Right on time. He had made the appointment. He had told them I was coming, but he had never told me. He enjoyed watching me scramble. He enjoyed watching me doubt my own mind. When I came home, he would ask how it went. I would say fine. He would say, "I'm glad you remembered. I was worried you were having another lapse." The lapses became his favorite topic. He invited my parents for dinner. I was excited. I cooked a roast. I set the table. When they arrived, Adrian was the perfect host. He poured the wine. He charmed my mother. Then, over dessert, he leaned in with a serious expression. "I'm a little concerned about Nora," he said. My father looked at me. "What do you mean?" Adrian sighed. "She's been forgetting things. Important things. She leaves the stove on. She wanders out of the house at night. I found her in the garden at 3 a.m. last week, talking to herself." My mother gasped. I dropped my fork. "That's a lie," I said. My voice was shaking. "I never did that." Adrian reached over and took my hand. "It's okay, honey. You don't remember. That's part of the problem." He looked at my parents with sad eyes. "The doctor says it might be early onset dissociation from the stress." My parents looked at me with pity. They didn't see my anger. They saw my denial as a symptom. "Oh, Nora," my mother said, "you need to listen to Adrian. He takes such good care of you." I looked around the table. I was outnumbered. My truth was being outvoted by his fiction. He escalated the gaslighting to physical objects. I had a necklace my grandmother gave me. It was cheap gold, but I loved it. I kept it in a jewelry box on the dresser. One day, it was gone. I searched everywhere. I asked Adrian. He said he hadn't seen it. A week later, we were at a gala. A woman walked by, wearing a necklace that looked exactly like mine. I stared. It couldn't be. When we got home, I went to my jewelry box. The necklace was there. Right on top. I gasped. I knew I had looked there a dozen times. Adrian walked in. "Found it?" he asked. I told you it was probably just under something. He smiled. "You really need to be more organized, Nora. You get so worked up over nothing." He had taken it. He had put it back. He was playing God with my possessions. He was teaching me that nothing was stable. Not even the solid objects in my room. The house itself became his accomplice. He installed a smart home system. He controlled the lights from his phone. I would be reading in the living room, and the lights would dim. I would turn them up. They would dim again. I would call out, "Adrian, stop it." He would call back from his office. Stop what? I'm working. He would come in and check the switch. It works fine, he would say. Maybe you're just tired. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. He controlled the thermostat. I would wake up freezing in the middle of the night. The thermostat would read 60 degrees. I would turn it up. The next morning, it would be back to 70. He would say, I must have dreamed it. It's always 70, Nora. You know I like it consistent. I started sleeping in a sweater. I started keeping a flashlight under my pillow. I was living in a haunted house, but the ghost was my husband. I realized that to fight him, I needed to become a spy in my own life. I needed objective reality. I needed proof that wasn't filtered through his mouth. I bought a cheap voice recorder with my cash stash. I hid it in the potted plant in the kitchen. I bought a second one and taped it under the dining room table. I started recording our conversations. The next time he tried we discussed this routine, I was ready. He came home and asked why I hadn't picked up the dry cleaning. We talked about it at breakfast, he said. You promised you'd go. I said nothing. I went to the kitchen and retrieved the recorder. I listened to the breakfast conversation. We had talked about the weather. We had talked about coffee. We had never mentioned dry cleaning. I didn't play it for him. Not yet. I just listened to it, alone in the bathroom. The relief was overwhelming. I wasn't crazy. He was a liar. I saved the file. I named it Lie Has Shown. I started tracking the security cameras. I noticed a pattern. They went offline for 5 minutes every day at 2 a.m. System update. It was a tiny window, but it was consistent. I set min alarm for 1:55 a.m. I would wake up, wait for the red light on the hallway camera to blink off, and then I would move. I would creep downstairs. I would check the mail that he had left on his desk. I would take photos of documents with an old digital camera I found in a drawer, one that didn't connect to the cloud. I found bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed. I found emails to a lawyer about conservatorship. I looked up the word. It meant legal control over someone deemed unfit to care for themselves. He wasn't just gaslighting me. He was building a legal case to own me. He was documenting my instability to a judge. He was going to lock me away and keep the money. The realization turned my blood to ice. I wasn't a wife. I was an asset to be liquidated. I needed to know what he was telling the doctors. I found his appointment book. He had a meeting with Dr. Evans, the psychiatrist he had forced me to see. I couldn't go, but I could listen. I bought a baby monitor. It was risky. I hid the transmitter unit behind a row of books on the shelf in his home office. I took the receiver to the laundry room in the basement. When Dr. Evans came for a home visit, I went to do laundry. I put on headphones. I heard them talking. Adrian sounded heartbroken. She's getting worse, doctor. She's paranoid. She thinks I'm stealing her things. She thinks the house is against her. I'm afraid she might hurt herself. Dr. Evans sounded sympathetic. It sounds like a classic persecution complex. We might need to consider inpatient care if she doesn't stabilize. Adrian sighed. I just want her to be safe. I'll do whatever it takes. I gripped the washing machine. He was performing. He was scripting my commitment. I recorded the transmission. I had his voice. Calm and calculated. Lying about my sanity. He tried to isolate me from the one thing that still gave me joy. My dog, Scout. Scout was my shadow. He slept by my side of the bed. One afternoon, Scout got sick. He was vomiting. He was lethargic. I was terrified. Adrian looked at the dog and shook his head. He must have gotten into something. Did you leave chocolate out? Did you leave your pills out? He looked at me accusingly. I told you to be careful, Nora. I knew I hadn't left anything out. We rushed Scout to the vet. The vet induced vomiting. They found a wrapper. It was a wrapper for a dark chocolate bar. I didn't eat dark chocolate. Adrian did. He had fed the dog chocolate to punish me. Or to frame me. Or both. Scout survived, barely. Adrian played the hero. He paid the bill. He petted the dog. "I'm so glad you're okay, buddy. Mommy needs to be more careful, doesn't she?" I looked at him with pure hatred. He had poisoned an innocent animal to score a point. I realized then that there was no bottom. There was no line he wouldn't cross. I slept with Scout's leash tied to my wrist that night. I would not let him hurt the dog again. The incidents became more public. We were at a restaurant. I ordered a glass of wine. The waiter brought it. Adrian reached over and moved the glass away. "I don't think that's a good idea, Nora. With your medication." He said it loud enough for the next table to hear. I wasn't on medication that interacted with alcohol. I told him so. He smiled sadly. "Please, don't make a scene. You know how you get." I stood up. "I don't get like anything," I snapped. People turned to look. The crazy wife, yelling at her patient husband. I saw the judgment in their eyes. I saw Adrian's triumphant smirk hidden behind his napkin. I sat down. I drank water. I had played right into his hands. I realized that anger was a trap. Emotion was a trap. To survive, I had to be a stone. I had to be boring. I had to give him nothing to work with. I started a log of his movements. I noted when he left for work, when he came home, when he went to the gym. I noticed he had a second phone. He kept it in the glove box of his car. He thought I didn't know. One day, while he was in the shower, I took his car keys. I ran to the garage. I opened the glove box. The phone was there. It was locked. But the notifications were visible. Messages from Asset Manager. Messages from Dr. Evans. And messages from a contact named Elena. The texts from Elena were intimate. "Can't wait to see you." "Is she asleep?" I felt a strange sense of relief. An affair. That was normal. That was a mundane betrayal. But then I read the next one. "Did you get the signature? We need to file the papers by the 1st. Elena wasn't a mistress. She was a lawyer. Or a fixer. They were conspiring. I took a photo of the screen with my digital camera. I heard the shower turn off. I ran back to the house. I put the keys back. My heart was hammering so hard I thought he would hear it. I sat on the bed and pretended to read. He walked in, toweling his hair. "Did you go out?" he asked. I heard the door. "Just checking the mail," I said. He nodded. He didn't believe me. I could tell. The air between us was tightening. I needed a place to hide the evidence that wasn't in the house. The house was compromised. I thought about the library. It was public. It was safe. I went to the library during my allowed grocery time. I rented a locker in the basement using my maiden name and cash. I put the digital camera, the voice recorder, and the notebook inside. I put the key in my shoe, under the sole. It was the only place he didn't check. Now, even if he destroyed the house, even if he locked me away, the proof existed. It was outside his reach. That thought gave me strength. The gala was approaching. The same gala where the story began. I knew he was planning something big. The pressure was ramping up. He was more critical, more watchful. He asked me every day how I was feeling. He asked if I was ready for the crowd. He was priming me to fail. He wanted me to have a breakdown in public. He wanted a room full of witnesses to see the unstable wife so he could quietly sign the papers the next day. I decided I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I would be perfect. I would be ice. And I would carry the evidence on my body. I sewed a tiny pocket into the lining of my gala dress. It was just big enough for a micro SD card. I transferred all the files, the photos, the recordings, the logs, onto the card. I would wear the proof against my heart. The night before the gala, he sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at me with what looked like genuine sadness. "I miss the old Nora," he said. "The one who was happy. The one who trusted me." I looked at him. I saw the layers of manipulation. I saw the actor. "She's still here," I said quietly. "She's just tired." He stroked my cheek. "I know. We'll get you help. After tomorrow, everything will change. I promise." It was a threat disguised as a comfort. After tomorrow. That was the deadline. He was going to make his move. I had 24 hours to make mine. I didn't sleep. I lay awake and rehearsed my plan. I went over the escape route. I went over the contact numbers I had memorized. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a survivor. The morning of the gala, the atmosphere was electric. The staff were rushing around. Adrian was on the phone constantly. I moved through the house like a ghost. I avoided him. I went to the garden and said goodbye to the trees. I said goodbye to the cage. I went to the studio and looked at the empty easel. I promised myself I would paint again. I would paint with color and rage and joy. I went to my room to dress. I put on the blue gown. I felt the tiny hard square of the SD card in the lining. It was my shield. Then Adrian came in. He gave me the necklace. He stole my phone. He locked the door. The trap was sprung, but he didn't know I had the key to the real lock. He didn't know I had the truth. I sat in the car as we drove to the gala. The lock engaged. The silence was heavy. I looked at his profile. He looked calm. He looked victorious. He thought he had won. He thought I was broken. He didn't see the fire in my gut. He didn't know that the unstable wife was about to bring his house of cards down. We pulled up to the venue. The cameras flashed. The crowd cheered. Adrian turned to me. "Ready, darling?" he asked. "Smile. Everyone is watching." I looked at him. I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Yes," I said. "They are." I stepped out of the car. I stepped into the light, and I prepared to burn it all down. The gala was a blur of lights and forced smiles. I held Adrian's arm as we navigated the room. I felt the SD card against my ribs with every breath. I needed to get away from him, just for a moment, to make the call. But he was glued to my side. He introduced me to judges, to politicians, to doctors. He introduced me with a hand on the small of my back. A subtle guide, a subtle restraint. He would whisper to them, "She's doing so well tonight," as if I were a recovering addict or a child. I gritted my teeth and played the part. I nodded. I sipped sparkling water. I waited for an opening. It came in the form of a spilled drink. A waiter bumped into a guest near us, sending a tray of champagne crashing to the floor. The distraction was chaotic and immediate. Adrian turned to look. In that split second, I slipped my hand from his arm. "Bathroom," I whispered. And I didn't wait for his nod. I moved quickly through the crowd, weaving between the black tuxedos and the silk dresses. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the coat check. I told the attendant I needed to get something from my husband's coat. I described it perfectly. A black cashmere overcoat with a silk lining. She hesitated. I gave her my most charming, desperate smile. "Please," I said. "My inhaler is in the pocket. I feel an attack coming on." She softened. She found the coat. I reached into the inner pocket. I wasn't looking for an inhaler. I was looking for his phone. Not the one he showed me, but the other one. The one from the glove box. I knew he wouldn't leave it in the car tonight. He needed to be in contact with his team. I felt the hard rectangle of the device. I pulled it out. I shielded it with my clutch. I turned away from the attendant and pressed the power button. It was locked, of course. But I had watched him. I had watched him enter the code 100 times on the security keypad. It was the same pattern. Top left, bottom right, center. I entered it. The phone unlocked. My hands shook as I opened the file manager. I didn't have much time. I scrolled past the photos, past the contacts. I found a folder named simply Project N. I opened it. The contents made my knees buckle. It wasn't just a plan, it was a dossier. There were scanned copies of my medical records, annotated with notes in his handwriting. Exaggerate symptoms here. Stress paranoid tendencies. There were drafts of emails to Dr. Symptoms, Evans, coaching him on what to write in his reports. There were financial documents showing that he had moved all our joint assets into a trust that I couldn't access. A trust controlled by him as my guardian. But the most chilling file was a video. It was dated from 3 months ago. I clicked play. The video showed me sleeping in our bed. The angle was from the ceiling. I was tossing and turning. Then, the door opened. Adrian walked in. He was holding a small vial. He leaned over me. He put a few drops of liquid on my lips. I stirred but didn't wake. He stroked my hair and whispered, "Sleep tight, my little bird." The video ended. I stared at the screen in horror. He had been drugging me. The fog, the memory lapses, the exhaustion. It wasn't stress. It wasn't anxiety. It was him. He was chemically inducing the instability he was reporting. He was poisoning me to prove I was sick. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost retched. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into the ballroom and hold the phone up for everyone to see. But I knew it wouldn't work. He would spin it. He would say I stole the phone. He would say the video was out of context. He would say I was having an episode. I needed to get the data off the phone. I needed to send it to someone safe. I opened his email app. I attached the folder. I typed in the email address of the only person I could trust. Sarah. I hit send. The progress bar crawled. 10%. 20%. I looked at the door. I expected him to burst in any second. 50%. The coat check girl asked if I found my inhaler. Almost, I said. Just a second. 80%. Sent. I quickly deleted the email from the sent folder. I wiped the screen with my thumb. I put the phone back in the coat pocket. I took a deep breath. I walked back into the party. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had done it. The proof was out. But I wasn't safe yet. I had to survive the rest of the night. I found Adrian near the bar. He was looking around, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. When he saw me, his face relaxed, but his eyes remained cold. "There you are," he said. "You were gone a long time." He gripped my arm, harder this time. I was worried. I looked at him. I saw the monster clearly now. There was no love in his face. There was only possession. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a doll that wouldn't talk back, wouldn't leave, wouldn't age. He wanted to freeze me in a state of permanent dependence. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was steady, just fixing my makeup. He studied my face. He was looking for a crack. He was looking for the fear. I didn't give it to him. I gave him a mask of perfect porcelain. "You look beautiful," he said. "Let's go dance." He led me to the dance floor. The music was a slow waltz. He pulled me close. I could smell his cologne. It smelled like expensive lies. We moved in a circle. "I have a surprise for you tomorrow," he whispered in my ear. "We're going on a trip. Just the two of us. A special clinic in Switzerland. Wonderful doctors. They'll take good care of you. My blood ran cold. Switzerland. A clinic. He wasn't just planning a conservatorship. He was planning an exile. He was going to lock me away in a foreign country where I knew no one, where the laws were different, where I would be completely at his mercy. That sounds nice, I managed to say. Yes, he said. It will be a fresh start. For us. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Real tears, they spilled onto his cheeks. I just love you so much, Nora. I can't bear to see you suffer. I have to save you. I realized then the depth of his delusion. He believed his own story. He believed he was the hero. He believed that breaking me was saving me. He was crying not for my pain, but for the beauty of his own sacrifice. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. He was a sentimental sadist. He loved the tragedy of our life. Because he was the author of it, I needed to leave. Tonight. I couldn't wait for tomorrow. I couldn't go to Switzerland. I spun away from him as the music ended. I need some air, I said. It's too hot in here. I walked toward the terrace doors. He started to follow. I'll come with you, he said. No, I said firmly. I turned and put a hand on his chest. Please, Adrian. Just 5 minutes alone. I promise I'll stay right on the terrace. I just need to breathe. He hesitated. He looked at the door, then at me. 5 minutes, he said. Then I'm coming to get you. I walked out onto the terrace. The night air was cool. I walked to the edge of the balcony. It was on the second floor. Below was a garden. I looked down. There was a trellis covered in vines. It looked sturdy. It was my only way out. I didn't have my car keys. I didn't have my coat. I just had the dress, the shoes, and the SD card. I kicked off my heels. I climbed over the stone railing. The trellis shook as I put my weight on it. I scrambled down, scraping my arms, tearing the expensive silk of my gown. I hit the ground and rolled. I stood up. I was in the shadows. I ran. I ran through the gardens, keeping to the dark patches. I heard the terrace door open above me. I heard Adrian's voice calling my name. Nora, Nora! It wasn't a question. It was a command. I ran faster. I reached the service gate at the back of the property. It was locked. I climbed it. The metal dug into my bare feet. I dropped down onto the street. I didn't stop. I ran toward the lights of the main road. I flagged down a taxi. I didn't have cash on me. It was in the library locker. But I had the platinum card. I prayed he hadn't canceled it in the last hour. Drive, I told the driver. Just drive. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. A woman in a torn ball gown, barefoot, bleeding, breathless. Where to, lady? He asked. The police station, I said. Take me to the main precinct. I sat back in the seat. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to sit on them. I checked my phone. No, I didn't have my phone. He still had it. I was untethered. But I was free. I closed my eyes and saw the image of the trellis, the dark garden, the open sky. I had escaped the castle. Now I had to slay the dragon. We arrived at the station. I paid the driver with the card. It worked. Thank God. I walked into the station. The fluorescent lights were harsh. The officer at the desk looked up. He saw the dress. He saw the blood. He stood up. Ma'am? Are you okay? I walked up to the desk. I reached into my dress lining and pulled out the SD card. I placed it on the counter. My name is Nora Blackwood, I said. My voice was clear and loud. My husband is trying to kill me. This is the evidence. I sat in the interview room for hours. I told them everything. I told them about the locks, the pills, the gaslighting. I told them about the video. They plugged the SD card into a computer. I watched their faces change. I watched the skepticism turn to horror. They saw the documents. They saw the video of him drugging me. They heard the recordings of his lies. They called Sarah. She confirmed receiving the email. She was on her way. Then the door opened. A lawyer walked in. Not Adrian's lawyer. A public defender. He looked tired but kind. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "We have enough for a protective order. We have enough for an arrest warrant. Assault. Unlawful imprisonment. Fraud." I let out a breath I had been holding for 3 years. "Is he here?" I asked. "He's in the lobby," the lawyer said. "He came to report you missing. He says you're having a psychotic break." I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "Let him say it," I said. "Let him say whatever he wants. The camera doesn't lie." Sarah arrived. She hugged me and didn't let go. She brought me sweatpants and a t-shirt. I took off the ruined gown. I left it in a pile on the floor. It looked like a shed skin. I put on the cheap cotton clothes. They felt like armor. I walked out into the lobby with Sarah and the officers. Adrian was there. He was talking to the sergeant. He looked impeccable. He looked worried. When he saw me, his face lit up with that fake relief. "Nora," he cried. He started to move toward me. "Thank God you're safe." I was so... "Stop," I said. I didn't shout. I just spoke. The officer stepped in front of him. He stopped. He looked confused. "Nora?" he said. "What's going on? Come here. Let's go home." I looked him in the eye. I saw the fear flickering behind the mask. He knew. He sensed the shift. "I'm not going home," I said. "I'm never going home." The sergeant stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest." He read the charges. Adrian's face went pale. He looked at me. "Nora, don't do this. You're not well. You need me." "No," I said. "I needed you to leave me alone. And now you will." They handcuffed him. He didn't fight. He just stared at me. He started to cry. "I did it for you," he sobbed. "I did it all for you. Who will take care of you now?" I watched him being led away. I felt a strange emptiness where the fear used to be. "I will," I whispered. "I will take care of me." I walked out of the station into the cool morning air. The sun was coming up. It was gray and misty. It wasn't a perfect sunrise. It was messy and real. I took Sarah's hand. "Let's go get pancakes," I said. "I'm starving." And for the first time in years, I was hungry for my own life. The days following the arrest were not a quiet fade into peace. They were a tactical dismantle of a fortress. I did not go back to the mansion. I stayed on Sarah's pull-out couch, sleeping in fits and starts, waking up at the sound of a passing car, convinced it was his black sedan. But the silence was different now. It was not the heavy, expensive silence of the estate. It was the noisy, chaotic silence of reality. The first step was the legal wall. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Miss Vance, who had eyes like flint and a voice that did not tremble. She did not work for charity. She worked on contingency. Because once she saw the contents of the SD card, she knew we would win. We filed for an emergency protective order. We filed for a freeze on all marital assets. We filed for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and fraud. Adrian did not go down quietly. He posted bail within 4 hours of the arrest. He immediately launched a public relations campaign. He didn't attack me. That would have been too crude. He played the grieving, worried husband. He released a statement through his attorney, asking for privacy for his troubled wife during her medical crisis. He was trying to rewrite the ending even as the credits rolled. He wanted the world to believe I was a woman who had cracked under the pressure of a high society life, and he was the saint waiting to welcome me back to the asylum. For a week, I saw his face on the news, looking pale and sympathetic, wearing a suit that I knew cost more than Sarah's car. He was charming the public. He was spinning the web one last time, but I had the scissors. The hearing for the long-term protective order was the turning point. I walked into the courtroom, wearing a simple gray suit I had bought at a thrift store. I wore no makeup. I wanted the judge to see me, not the doll Adrian had painted. Adrian was there, flanked by 3 lawyers. He looked at me, with that same devastating mix of pity and love. He mouthed the words, "I forgive you." It made my skin crawl. His lawyer stood up and painted a picture of a loving home, a devoted husband, and a wife prone to paranoia and memory loss. He submitted affidavits from the doctors Adrian had coached. He submitted the incident logs Adrian had forged. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Then Miss Vance stood up. She didn't make a speech. She simply requested permission to play 3 audio files and view 1 video clip from the evidence submitted. The judge agreed. The courtroom grew quiet. The first file played. It was Adrian's voice, clear and cold, talking to his asset manager. "She's completely manageable. The trust is locked. If she tries to access the funds, the incompetence clause kicks in." The second file was the recording from the baby monitor, where he coached Dr. Evans on what to write in my medical file. The gasps in the room were audible. Adrian didn't move, but his jaw tightened. Then came the video. The overhead shot of the bedroom, the sleeping woman, the loving husband entering with a vial, the drugging, the whisper, "Sleep tight, my little bird." The silence that followed the video was absolute. It was the silence of a room realizing they were looking at a monster. The judge stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at Adrian. The pity in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard glare. Adrian's charm evaporated. He slumped in his chair. The public mask slipped, and for a second, the terrified, obsessive boy beneath was visible. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying because he had lost control. He was crying because the script had been burned. The ruling was swift. The protective order was granted. For the maximum term, the judge ordered an immediate forensic audit of our finances. She granted me exclusive use of the city condo, one of the properties I didn't even know we owned until the audit revealed it while the divorce proceeded. She unsealed my access to the joint accounts, citing clear evidence of financial abuse. The gavel came down, and it sounded like a lock breaking. As we were leaving the courtroom, Adrian tried one last time. He broke away from his lawyers. The bailiff stepped forward, but he stopped 10 feet away. He didn't shout. He looked at me with wet, red eyes. "You can't survive out there, Nora," he said. His voice was trembling. "You don't know how the world works. I did everything for you. I made you a queen." I stopped. I turned to face him. I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, distant pity. "You didn't make me a queen, Adrian," I said. My voice was steady, clearer than it had been in 3 years. "You made me a prisoner, and the world works just fine." I checked. I turned my back on him and walked out the heavy oak doors. I didn't look back. The financial disentanglement was messy. The forensic accountant found layers of shell companies, trusts within trusts, and accounts in names I had never heard of. He had been siphoning off my own premarital savings, my potential earnings, and even taking out loans in my name to leverage his own deals. It took months to untangle, but every form I signed, every account I closed, felt like reclaiming a piece of my body. I watched the numbers in my own private bank account grow, It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I paid Miss Vance. I paid Sarah back for the groceries. I bought a car, a used sedan, with a dent in the bumper and an engine that purred. It wasn't a luxury SUV. It was better. It was the vehicle of my autonomy. I moved into a small apartment in a part of the city that Adrian would have sneered at. It was a fourth-floor walk-up. The floors were creaky wood, not marble. The windows looked out onto a busy street, not a manicured garden. The radiator hissed and clanked in the middle of the night. The first night I spent there, I sat on the floor with a box of pizza and a bottle of cheap wine. I looked around at the peeling paint on the ceiling. I listened to the couple arguing next door. I heard a siren in the distance. It was loud. It was gritty. It was imperfect. And it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I started painting again. Not the polite florals Adrian had demanded. I painted big, messy, abstract canvases full of red and black and gold. I painted the feeling of the glass wall shattering. I joined a small gallery co-op. I didn't sell much, but I sold enough to pay the electric bill. I got a job at a bookstore. I shelved books and talked to customers and made coffee. My hands stopped shaking. The tremor that had plagued me for 3 years simply vanished. I stopped taking the pills he had forced on me. The fog lifted. My memory returned, sharp and clear. I remembered who I was before the black sedan pulled up in the rain. One afternoon, 6 months later, I was walking home from the grocery store. I was carrying 2 heavy bags. It was raining. My hair was wet. My shoes were soaked. I stopped at a crosswalk. A black luxury car pulled up to the light. For a second, my heart hammered. I looked at the driver. It wasn't him. It was just a stranger. I watched the car drive away. I looked down at my wet shoes. I looked at the heavy bags cutting into my fingers. I was tired. I was cold. I was alone. And I smiled. I smiled until my face hurt. I realized then that safety isn't a gate. Safety isn't a camera. Safety isn't a man who solves every problem before you even know you have one. Safety is the knowledge that you can solve your own problems. Safety is the ability to walk in the rain and know that you chose to be there. I walked the rest of the way home, unlocked my own front door with my own key, and kicked it shut behind me. I fed Scout, who was snoring on the rug, a rug I had picked out myself. I made toast for dinner and burned it. I ate it anyway. I stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker on. I thought about the mansion on the hill. It was probably empty now, or sold to the next aspiring king. I thought about the woman in the midnight blue gown, trembling in front of the mirror. She felt like a stranger. I raised my glass of tap water to her reflection in the dark glass. I had nothing of what he gave me, and everything I needed. A queen can still be a prisoner. Love isn't luxury, it's freedom.